Police abuse remains one of the most serious and divisive human rights violations in the United States today. The horrific images of Rodney King being beat by the LAPD is one of the most blatant reminders of police brutality against innocent victims. The excessive use of force by police officers, including unjustified shootings, severe beatings, and fatal chokings, persist because overwhelming barriers to accountability make it possible for officers who commit human rights violations to escape due punishment and often to repeat their offenses. Police and public officials greet each new report of brutality with denials or explain that the act was just an aberration, while the administrative and criminal systems that should deter these abuses by holding officers accountable instead virtually guarantee them impunity. The special insider exclusive investigation discovered that police brutality is persistent and rampant across America, and that systems to deal with abuse have failed, and that victims seeking redress face daunting obstacles at every point in the process, ranging from overt intimidation to the reluctance of local and federal prosecutors to take on brutality cases of officers who have committed these human rights violations. Despite claims to the contrary from city officials, where abuses have become scandals in the media, efforts to make meaningful reforms have fallen short. The barriers to accountability are remarkably similar from city to city. Shortcomings in recruitment, training, and management are common to all. So is the fact that officers who repeatedly commit human rights violations tend to be a small minority, who taint entire police departments but are protected routinely by the silence of their fellow officers and by flawed systems of reporting, oversight, and accountability. Today, the Insider exclusive TV series examines this epidemic in this exclusive special, Police Brutality, the Jody Mack Woodfox story, and how famed Oakland-based civil rights lawyer John Burstt, founder and partner of the law offices of John Burstt, got justice for his client with a record-breaking settlement against the city of Oakland. You will see how John proved this case by exposing the lies and the contradictions of the various Oakland police officers. As John has often said, the problem of police brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness. In this great and strong nation, we all have become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of the conflict. John has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best civil rights trial lawyers in Oakland, in California, and in the nation. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police brutality. He understands that police brutality is one of the most serious, enduring, and divisive human rights violations in the United States. And the problem is not just in Oakland, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. He learned a long time ago that if a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. His goals, not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure that all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agendas. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California at the law offices of John Burstt. It is my privilege and my great pleasure to introduce John Burstt to the show. Welcome to the show, John.
Good to be with you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm and the type of law that you practice.
Well, my practice is essentially a civil rights practice, plaintiff-oriented. That is, I represent people who are making allegations of misconduct against police agencies or corporations or municipalities. Essentially, it's a victim's rights type of practice.
And they're tough cases because generally juries assume that law enforcement could not be lying, right?
Absolutely. This is the toughest form of practice in large measure because there's this mountain and public perception that police do not do anything wrong. and the claimant has to disprove and climb that mountain, if you will, just to get even. It's a real challenge for them. But I've always seen this as what was important. As a civil rights lawyer, I understand that the odds are against my clients. But my sense is that they deserve access to the courts, because if you don't have access, then you put yourself in an anarchy situation and you could be very frustrated. So I try to provide an avenue for them.
When you say your sense of responsibility is to provide an avenue for them, why is that? When you could be representing, IBM or something.
Absolutely. I have an MBA, and so I could, but I chose that I wanted to participate in the social order, social activism. The law allowed for that. I watched the civil rights movement unfold. There were always a few people in every community who was engaged in social activism through the law. That made sense to me, and so I chose that as a way to lead my life.
By the way, for our audience, you wrote a book about 10 years ago, Blue versus Black, which kind of summarized a lot of your thinking there, didn't it?
Blue versus Black, let's end the conflict between cops and minorities. And what I sought to do there is look at some of the problems that exist in various communities and then see if I could offer some solutions on how to repair this conflict between the cops and the minorities. It was a tough challenge at the time. I'm still working my way through it.
Yeah.
Much of what I recommended in that book, I tried to include in a case that I was involved in called The Riders, and thinking about a series of reform.
The case we're going to discuss today is about Jody Mack, Woodfox. Tell us who Jody was.
Jody Mack, frankly, is a kind of a typical young man who didn't have a family of a real sense, that he grew up with an aunt. He basically got in trouble a lot with the law. I view him as a person who just kind of grew up. And one day he's a man without any real direction and positive things in his life to put him on the right direction. So he certainly was a young man who constantly got in trouble. On the other hand, my view of this is that regardless of who he was, at the time, he did not deserve to be shot and killed the way he was.
So tell us about this case.
Jody Mack, with a girlfriend, was driving late, early one morning in the Fruitvale district in Oakland. A police officer sees him, decides to stop him. My view, just a young black man driving a car late at night. He wasn't violating any speed laws. The police then makes a U.
The Oakland
Police Department officers turned and pursued him, Officer Jimenez. Ultimately stopped him. Mr. Woodfox jumps out of the car and starts running at a diagonal away from the police officer. The police officer then turns as he's running past him and down the street, fires multiple shots at him, hitting Mr. Woodfox 3 times in the back portion of his body.
Right.
A most shocking event.
Right.
Because at the time, the young man had not presented any weapons. He was unarmed. He essentially was running away. It looked as if, given what the witness said, he was trying to hold up his pants.
Yeah.
But he was shot and killed under the most egregious of circumstances.
When young black men hear about this, read about it in the newspaper, events like this, when they see the Oakland Police Department chasing after him, they have to have some fear, don't they?
They should be scared to death.
Yeah.
But to some extent, it creates a fatalistic attitude on their parts that it could happen to them.
Right.
I spend a great amount of my time trying to advise young men what they ought to do when they're stopped by the police. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't make any false moves. Don't reach for anything. And don't run. Because if you run, you might get shot. And if you get caught, you're going to get beat up if you're not shot. Those are the fundamental
These are the
principles.
facts of life today.
Facts of life in the African-American community. And so being stopped by the police, being harassed by the police is pretty common.
Yeah.
And so young men have to develop a way to handle this so they don't view this as an attack on their ego, because once they do, they cannot win that kind of struggle.
What was your legal strategy to win this case?
Well, my legal strategy here was pretty simple, that the use of force under these circumstances was woefully unjustified. This young man was running away. The officer was not in danger. And the officer then fired a deadly weapon into this young boy's back three times.
This is Officer Jimenez.
Officer Jimenez. So it's a pretty easy case in that sense,
Yeah.
because it's clearly excessive force, violation of the Fourth Amendment. What outraged me about this case was the fact that this same officer had been involved in another shooting where a young Indian boy was shot and killed about 7 months before. Under that particular case, he claims again that the young man was making a false move. The young man was unarmed, and he was killed as well.
Now, this brings up a very good point. He shoots another young man. There is an internal affairs department in every police department. What is the result of that internal affairs investigation?
Well, the first one with the young Indian boy, that case, it was determined to be justifiable shooting. The second one, involving Jody Woodfox, the police, to their credit, did not say it was a justifiable shooting, and they in fact fired him, and which was good. I think that young man, that officer, should have been prosecuted very much like another case that I was involved in, and I tried to get the district attorney's office to prosecute him, but they did not. This was a horrible shooting.
Why wouldn't they?
I think they did not prosecute because the young man had a background, had a criminal history.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only thing I can think of, because it should not justify. He should have been prosecuted.
Exactly. That's almost irrelevant, isn't it?
In my view, it's irrelevant in light of what was going on at the time.
Yes.
The fact that he had a background, the officer who shot him didn't know that.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't know that. And the facts should be considered at the time in which they occur. Mm-hmm. And at the time he was shot and killed, the young man was running away, had not presented any kind of physical danger to the officer. The officer exercised extraordinarily poor judgment, and he fired this weapon and killed us. He should have been prosecuted.
Yeah. Now, you prosecuted this case, the civil case, and it was a violation of Jody Woodfox's Fourth and 14th Amendment rights. Explain for our audience what
the Fourth Amendment rights are essentially the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. The seizure comes from the use of excessive force. That is, the use of a firearm. When you hit someone, that is a seizure of that particular person. So that's a Fourth Amendment violation. That's number one. The 14th Amendment goes to the family's violation. That is a denial of equal protection of the law. It's a denial of familial relationships with the family. Yeah. He had 3 kids at the time. Right. Each one of them had been denied the access or the right of their relationship with their dad. So we cover that through the 4th and the 14th Amendment.
Tell us about the verdict.
The case ultimately settled. I say settled for $650,000. Yeah. And it was not a complicated case, and the damage question always is one, but we had to consider his background and how he was and the economic viability that he had. So it was a significant settlement for him. It was fair in the sense that this man was shot and killed, and he shouldn't have been killed, and we then provided for his children through the settlement.
Yeah, and some of the people that he left behind was his girlfriend, Karina Sanders, and his child by her. Yeah. And today we are fortunate to have Karina with us, so let's bring her on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Karina Sanders. Welcome to the show.
Hi. You
were Jody's girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
And you are the mother of your son, right?
Yes.
M.W. Mack.
Uh-huh.
And take us back to that day when you first found out what happened to Jody.
Well, I got the phone call in the middle of the night.
From
a friend of his, and I didn't really comprehend because it was the middle of the night, so I didn't listen. So in the morning I started. What did they say? He said something happened to Jody and something's wrong and something's going on and the police, and I just heard that. I didn't really hear what he was saying. So then the next morning, you know, when I woke up, I started calling his phone. When I didn't get the phone call back, and I contacted immediately family, and they said it was true. I was just disbelief, devastated, upset.
Who eventually told you?
His sister, Kanita.
The police didn't answer any questions?
Oh, no.
Did you call the police?
Yes, I did.
The Oakland police?
Yes, I did.
And you got no answer?
No.
What would they say? We don't know anything?
Eventually, they just hung up the phone. They'll put you on hold, and then they'll just hang up the phone.
They knew who you were. They knew why you were calling.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they had to know. They've already known the information that I really don't know. I don't know if it's really true or not. So they were just ignoring anyway. Personnel was ignoring, you know. And so when I found out that it was really true and they told me how it happened, I was just in disbelief, because police are supposed to protect and serve. So it's like, the police killed your son, father, and I'm like, what?
Really? How did you meet John?
I came in the next day, approximately, I guess, about 1 o'clock or somewhere in between that.
Yeah.
And that's when I met Mr. Burstt, and he explained to me, you know, a lot of things about what was going on and how it was going to go on. And I was still in a state of shock. I mean, you know, I was listening, but I was like, I wasn't really here, because I'm like, are you serious? You know, you're not saying someone off the street or a car accident, or, you know, you saying the police shot him. Like, for what? Like, why? You know? And so when I came to my senses, I was okay.
Now, you have a lot of people walk in the door or call you up and say the police shot, whatever.
Absolutely.
What was it about her case that made you decide to take this case?
It was the outrageous way the shooting took place. By the time I met with her, I knew then that he had been shot in the back 3 times.
Yeah.
It is very difficult for me to comprehend that any shooting can take place where you shoot someone in the back 3 times, particularly if they're unarmed.
Yeah.
So by then, I knew some semblance of the story. I then went out to the community, walked back through all of what I could see, sent my investigators out to find any witnesses that I could find. So by then, I was well on the track to determine that this was an outrageous shooting and something had to be done.
This has been a number of years this happened. Do you see, well, first of all, what's your opinion of the Oakland Police Department?
I just don't think they've learned any kind of lesson. I don't know, you know, what kind of training they have to go through, you know, to learn when or when not to shoot. But I'm not satisfied with the way they conduct their whole little operation.
So what's your opinion of John's law firm?
I'm very appreciative of Mr. Burst's law firm, for one. And what he does for this community is just, if we didn't have him, I don't know. I don't know what we would do, because it happens all the time, every day, you know. And there's not really no one else out here fighting as hard as he is to, you know, get some kind of justice any way he can, you know, for his people. So,
Well, it's a big compliment, John.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you very much for taking your time to come here today, and my condolences to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, police brutality is a very serious problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. All throughout the country, in all the major cities, you see scandal after scandal of police misconduct cases. It was in Philadelphia, New York, New Orleans, and certainly here in Oakland and around the Bay Area. I've been involved in many, many cases of police brutality. I don't see an end in sight. Even as I speak to you, I'm having cases, I'm evaluating new cases.
It's a two-part problem. Not only are some cops, not all, but some cops bad cops, but then the bigger problem is the cover-up, right?
The cover-up is always bad. I mean, there are a lot of great cops, and I have people that I know and I respect, and they tell me something took place, I believe it. On the other hand, the worst part of it is that the good cops do not come forward and talk about the bad cops. And as a consequence, the bad cops get a free pass from the good cops. And so there's no internal policing that takes place, because the problem can be solved if the police would police themselves. If they would then prosecute their own or fire those or get them out of the department and have things in place indicating that you can be held responsible for misconduct, then I think the problem gets solved. I've spoken about this a lot. It's accountability is the big issue, and the chief, command staff have to hold the younger officers accountable, but they have to hold themselves accountable as well and take responsibility.
Is racism a key component of police brutality?
Well, race is a big issue in terms of the ultimate impact, because I believe there's a different form of policing in the African-American community than it is in the white community. I think African-Americans are stopped, detained, searched, and arrested, and given the short end of the criminal justice system, much more so than anyone else. There's a huge disparity in treatment in the criminal justice system, and policing is at the first step of that whole process.
For the first time, in American history. We have an African-American president. We have an African-American attorney general. Why aren't things changing?
That's a very good question. I think that the president was snake-bitten by what happened in the one case that he got involved in involving Professor Gates.
At Harvard. Yeah.
But I think the Attorney General could do more. I have made a request of the Attorney General that they get involved in one of my cases. I also know that they have gotten involved in New Orleans in terms of the police agency there. I do think, though, that it is a case-by-case analysis, and I do think you have to have the political will to go in and do it because there's not a lot of political cachet, if you will, in attacking the police department. And so unless you have everything going for you, I don't see the Justice Department being overly aggressive in everyday cases.
What about internal affairs departments within police?
Every department has an internal affairs. I don't have a lot of confidence in internal affairs departments because largely there's a presumption that the officer is right and that much effort is made to discredit the citizen. Even little minor things, anything that can be done to discredit the citizen to give the officers a pass, that gets done. So I don't have great confidence in internal affairs departments in any department.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the program. It's because of your firm's dedication and your personal dedication to this cause that things are changing for the positive. Maybe slowly, but they're at least changing. And
well, I hope so.
Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.